everyone. Welcome to a new week. We are going to be moving away from broad organizational strategy and now starting to move into more local, specific organizational operations, policies, procedures, and how those are impacted by DEI. And how we can do a better job making our organizations more inclusive just by tweaking the processes we already have in place. So, last week we talked about broad strategies for managing diversity across large organizations. And really, we started there because it's important for an organization to have a broad strategy, to know how they feel about DEI, to know what their purpose for engaging in DEI initiatives is, and then from there they can move into implementing smaller local strategies to exercise that broader corporate strategy or organizational strategy. So this week we are going to be talking about recruitment and selection, which is a very classic HR topic. And we're going to start here because when we want to make an inclusive organization, we need to look around at who's in our organization. So which people are we bringing into our organization? Which people might we inadvertently be turning off from our organization based on how we represent ourselves, based on our organizational communications, based on where we're recruiting from? What pipeline are we using, and is the pipeline diverse? Because if the pipeline isn't diverse, well then we're certainly not going to get diverse applicants. So this week is all about how to just improve our recruitment and selection strategies in order to make them more inclusive of individuals. So to get started, the first step really is recruitment. So if we want to bring individuals into our organization, we first need to get them interested in our organization. So we can't shift through job applications or make job offers or onboard anybody if there's nobody eager to get into the organization. So just definitionally, we're talking about recruitment. We're talking about attracting as many qualified people as possible to apply for a job within an organization. So we have to somehow find qualified individuals, and then we have to get them to want to be part of our organization. So we could really have an entire class on just recruitment and not just a class session, but legitimately an entire course for 8 weeks or 16 weeks on recruitment. But suffice it to say, you all have had, I believe, a staffing class or will have a staffing class in this program, and you'll learn a little bit more about this process there. But broadly, when we're talking about recruitment, it is a process. And there are 4 broad steps. Of course, there are many more in between there, but the broad steps, step 1 involves recruitment objectives. So we first need to set our objectives. What is it that we're hoping to do? So if one of our recruitment objectives is to seek out, executive leaders who are or to increase the number of executive leaders who are female that are applying for our jobs, right? That can be an objective. To seek out or expand the number of individuals of color who might apply for our jobs, right? These can be recruitment objectives. So I want to make it very clear that when we get into talking about selection, particularly with DEI, there's a misconception that organizations are just seeking quotas, right? They're just filling quotas to get diverse individuals into organizations. And the use of quotas is actually illegal. So you cannot say, I'm going to hire 10 women and then set out and hire 10 women, right? That is not legally allowable. It's definitely not legally defensible. It could get you into a lot of trouble. But it is okay to say, we recognize that we don't have enough female leaders and that many of the leaders in our organization are male, and we want more representation of women at the top of the organization. However, in order to do that, we need to have a broader applicant pool that includes a greater percentage of women. So if we want women to be competitive and we want them to have the opportunity to be selective, we first have to recruit them into our organization. So we can have these broad objectives of increasing the number of women in our applicant pool. Then we have to create a recruitment strategy. So what is our strategy for recruiting executive women into our organization? For instance, if we step back and look at our messaging, what is the messaging that we're giving to women? So what if, for instance, we have our job advertisements, or on our company's website it says, work hard, play hard, or a lot of emphasis on being the best, and this like competitor, all the top dogs work here, things like that. Language could turn certain individuals off. So if you're really trying to recruit women and executive leaders that are women, it's helpful to look at the tools you're using, to look at your communication output, to look at the messages you're sending and say, wait a minute, are these going to help us achieve that objective? So we need to develop a broad strategy where we're going to recruit, how we're going to recruit them, what are we going to say, right? That's the strategizing part. Then once we have the strategy, step 3 is to engage in recruitment activities. So this is when we put our strategy into place. So this is when we make the phone calls. This is when we go to the trade shows. This is when we put out our advertisements to actually engage in the activities that support the strategy. And then the last step would be the results of our recruitment activities. And so with anything in HR and really in business in general, we need to measure it. We need to take time and assess, hey, was this successful or not? So at the end, when we close the recruitment cycle and we're going to shift to actually reviewing applications, we can say how many women applied for these jobs, what percentage of the total applicants were women, how does this compare to the last time we ran this job? So having those metrics to tell us, are we getting a return on investment? Are they working as intended? So recruiting job applicants, so I gave you kind of a brief overview there of what the recruitment process looks like, but then we can break down our job applicants into different samples, and this is important just to have the language of the field, so to speak. So the biggest circle, the biggest population in general would be the applicant population. So these are all individuals that could possibly apply for the job that we're listing. So all possible female executives that are in the same industry, right? Then we can break that down smaller into the applicant pool. So these are all individuals who were qualified or who kind of meet the general expectations and decided to actually apply. So you can see how that circle gets a little smaller because not everyone who's qualified will apply for various reasons. They might not know the job exists. They might not want to make a change. Maybe it's not in the geographic location they want, right? So these samples will get smaller and smaller as we go. Then we have job candidates. So these are individuals who applied, who meet the actual expectations and qualifications of the job, and whom we've selected to move forward in the process. So maybe these are individuals who get an interview or individuals who are offered the opportunity to take one of the selection tests. And then from there, the very smallest sample we have are hires. So of those job candidates who took and engaged in all of our screening and selection activities, which of those individuals have we decided to make a job offer to and have accepted, right? Because we will make job offers and sometimes candidates won't accept and they'll move on to a different opportunity or they'll stay with their current opportunity. So you can see how our percentage of hires to applicant population is small. And so when we start talking about diversity and inclusion and trying to increase certain groups of individuals or into our applicant population, the numbers get smaller and smaller as we go. So we want to get it right so that we're able to retain top talent and get them to actually come to our organization. So again, with that applicant population, I'm going to go through this briefly because you have the slides and I just gave you all of the good information up front there. So with the applicant population, these are all individuals who could possibly have an interest in the position. And it's during this stage that we start setting those recruitment objectives. So we need to identify the number of openings that we're going to be offering. We need to identify the hiring time frame. So are we going to be hiring within 6 months, within 2 months, next week? And we need to identify the type of applicants. So who is it that we're aiming to to recruit and to seek out in this current job opening situation. And from this, we create the job description. So again, the applicant population is the broadest lens that we can have. It's really that zoomed out, anybody that could fit. And it's during this time that we really start to narrow down how many openings we're going to have, when we're looking to hire, who we want to hire. And from all of that information, we create the job description. And that description will be used to help recruit people to apply. So one way that we can increase attraction to our organization is by being very mindful and intentional of the language that we're using when we create job descriptions. It's hard to imagine that job descriptions could be biased, but in actuality they can. And the language that is used can help put our biases on display. And we might not be attuned to them, but individuals from certain groups might be. And it could be a real turnoff, or in some cases offensive to those groups of individuals. So we definitely want to avoid, so I broke this down, based on different groups. So if we focus on gender, we want to be sure to avoid words specific to gender stereotypes. So, in the past, you might be hiring a fireman, right? But now we would say a firefighter. So trying to get away from some of those words that use man or woman in the actual job title or description. Words that would be, again, competitive. We want somebody who's aggressive. We want somebody who's action, focused, and these sorts of more aggressive masculine terms can be a turnoff for women. Again, avoiding those occupational words that might be gendered, like fireman, like policeman, and instead opting for person, right? Or whatever the occupation is, a firefighter, a police officer, rather than attaching a gendered word to it. Based on race and ethnicity, we want to be mindful that we aren't including requirements in the job description that might be a turnoff to certain individuals. So, for instance, putting in strong English language skills might lead some individuals to not want to apply if they aren't, they might be very fluent in English, but perhaps they don't know that they have strong English skills. And so some of these choices that we're using could be a turnoff for certain individuals. So perhaps you would just say, fluent in English. That tells somebody the level of proficiency they might need. If you say native English speaker, that indicates you're only looking for people whose first language really is English, and someone who is quite fluent in English might choose not to apply because they're technically not a native English speaker. So we want to be mindful that we're only listing things that are necessary for the job and that we're choosing words that are more appropriate for what we're looking for. So just saying fluent would be better than saying strong or native. Some job descriptions have included words like clean shaven, and anything in your job description that really focuses on appearance is probably a red flag. It's a no-go area for certain individuals with certain religious beliefs. Being clean shaven is actually not allowed. There are certain stereotypes associated with facial hair, and oftentimes individuals are, overlooked or stereotyped for having certain kinds of facial hair. But here, when you're saying clean shaven, you're indicating that you only want a certain type of individual, or again, might be offensive to certain individuals based on their religious beliefs or orientations. So I would not, in general, include anything that is related to appearance in a job description. These are certainly things that you could parse out later, and might not even be part of the job requirement. So if being clean shaven isn't necessarily part of the job, you don't need to include it. You could include professional appearance perhaps, or ability to dress professionally or something like that. But truly, I think those kinds of descriptions aren't needed. Professionally groomed hair, again, this sounds wild, but you will see these in some job descriptions, and they are not only offensive, but in some cases are now becoming illegal to have these statements. So hair and hairstyles do have protections in certain states in the United States because there are some individuals who have historically been discriminated against based on their hairstyles, particularly women of color and Black women who might have dreadlocks or other kinds of hairstyles that one group of people in society has deemed unprofessional, but that is just simply not true. And so using professionally groomed hair might signal to certain individuals that there's a standard and you might not value them if they're different. And so again, I just keep saying anything based on appearance, I probably would not include in the job description if you want to truly be inclusive of individuals who might have different styles of dress, different styles of hair, etc. We can also make job descriptions more inclusive based on age. So there are certain language choices we might make that can signal to individuals that we don't value older individuals or that they might not even be worthwhile to apply. So when we put things like young, energetic, or looking for recent graduates, this is all language to say we are not looking for older individuals, and particularly the recent graduate could get into that area of age discrimination depending on how the court might view that. So really, if you don't want to include any descriptors that would tie someone back to a certain age range, you want to focus on the requirements of the job. Using words like someone who's a digital native or tech savvy is not helpful because it has sort of this air of looking for a young individual or that they need to be, technologically advanced, which might be off-putting to certain older adults or who they might feel a little, self-conscious about applying. So rather than using things like digital native or tech savvy, it's better to list the actual requirements. So here you want to identify the specific years of experience and specific skills that you're looking for. So if you want someone who's able to use all the different programs in the Microsoft Office suite, then you just put that needs to be proficient with Microsoft Office and related softwares, or looking for someone who has at least 3 years of coding experience. So rather than making it tech savvy or making it sound like this younger language, just being very clear about here's what we're looking for and here's how many years we have, and then people either will or will not have those skills and will apply or will not apply. We also want to be mindful of ability status, so individuals who might have a disability, who might be a good fit for a job but choose not to apply because of the language in the job description. So it's really helpful to broaden our description of job tasks. We don't need to be, sometimes what we say we want someone to do, an individual who needs a job accommodation might think, oh, I can't do that job based on how it's written. So here, you might have seen this in job applications or job descriptions. Rather than saying you must be able to carry 50 pounds or lift 50 pounds, we could say something like must be able to move 50 pounds. So perhaps somebody that is in a wheelchair is able to use their wheelchair to move certain things from point A to point B. But we don't need to say lift or carry, as that might imply that they're going to be walking or need to be walking from point A to point B. So at the end of the day, if it doesn't matter how things get moved around, this more general, broad language is more inclusive. Might also use something like ability to communicate with customers versus talking to customers. Particularly now with customer service-based jobs, there's a lot of internet-based jobs. I don't know about you all, but I love the chat function. I don't have to call any customer service representatives. I love that. And so oftentimes there are different ways that someone could communicate. Maybe they have a device that enables them to, they can hear what someone says and they can use that device to then produce speech for a customer in return. Maybe they can use typing software, things like that. So is it really that they need to talk with customers, or is just general communication sufficient? We also want to remove what we would call ableist language that would make certain individuals with disabilities feel as though they shouldn't even apply. So saying we're looking for able-bodied individuals, well, what does that really mean? It kind of has an air of, if you have a disability, please don't apply. If we say you must be able to stand your entire shift, well, does someone really have to stand their entire shift? Could they use a stool? Is standing really a requirement of the job? So as we're creating these job descriptions, it's important to look through the language that we've chosen to say, is there anyone who's not like me who might read this and feel offended, or who might read this and think this job is not for me, because here they're kind of implicitly saying these are the types of individuals they're looking for. So if we're going to recruit people, we need to look at our recruiting materials, and we need to make sure that they're appropriate and inclusive in their language. So we had the entire applicant population, then we whittled it down to that applicant pool. So this is that subset of the population that basically individuals who were qualified and chose to apply. So here, this is when we kind of map on that recruitment strategy. So to get people to apply, we need to engage in broad recruitment. So we need to have a mass approach to try to reach multiple individuals, particularly if you're trying to increase the number of diverse applicants, whatever diverse means for your organization. But we need to use multiple recruitment outlets and try different sources. We can also engage in targeted recruitment. And so if we do the broad approach and we're trying to get out to multiple different sectors and we realize that's not really working, targeted recruitment is when we start to narrow down direct communication with specific, uniquely qualified types of individuals. So let's say you wanted to hire if you wanted to hire more or increase the number of applicants of color in your applicant pool, you can reach out to certain organizations. So they have the Black MBA Professional Association, things like that. Maybe there are sororities or fraternities that have alumni groups for Black or brown individuals. And so you can target these specific groups that will allow you to get at the individuals that you're looking for or hoping to increase within your applicant pool. Another would be if you're looking to hire female engineers. There are trade associations of women engineers, so that would be a really great place to go and recruit because now all of the individuals you are trying to increase in your applicant pool are right here in a specific association, and that is a good place to try to get your message out. So there are lots of methods for recruiting potential job applicants. We can use advertisements in newspapers. We can use television or radio advertising, trade magazines. So if there are specific, to your industry or to your group, specific magazines or outlets they use, you could advertise through them. We can use agencies or organizations. This is really helpful for targeted minority recruitment. We can do employment agencies and search firms. So sometimes we can hire a search firm, particularly if we're looking to hire an upper level executive or a new CEO or a new president of an organization. They can help us with recruiting individuals. Universities and colleges are great places to try to recruit for your organization, and we see this a lot here at WVU. If you go into certain departments, go into certain clubs, someone who would be looking to hire for HR could come to the MSHRM group here at WVU, and that would be a great place to find individuals who might be qualified. As well as job fairs, and some of you might have participated in those at your undergrad, either here at WVU or other institutions. Professional associations, going to professional conferences, going to their organizations, maybe advertising on their websites. And then, of course, you can also use your inside organization resources. So previous employees who have left, you could reach back out to them and see if they're interested in coming back. You can do employee referrals. So who's in your employees' networks? If you want to increase the applicant pool of women, you could ask your female employees who they know and if they can refer anybody. So using your own employee networks is really great. And your current employees, who do you currently have that might actually be able to fulfill the role that you're trying to hire? And do they have the skills needed, or can you supply them with those skills that would make them qualified for the job? And of course, your own company website, anything that's outwardly facing, social media sites, anything like that can be a resource to recruit. Okay, so then our recruitment messaging. We want to be mindful of the messaging that we're putting out. I've alluded to this a little bit through the job description, but also through marketing materials, through website materials, through conversations we might be having with potential applicants. We want our messaging to show that we're committed to DEI. We do that when we use inclusive language, and we do that by sometimes specifically identifying what we're doing for DEI. So what's most important, and they know this through survey research of minority applicants who are applying for jobs, that it's great when an organization has diversity listed as a value. When they look on your website, when they look at your materials and they see diversity is listed as a value, that's really great at attracting people. But an organization also needs to explain why, because you don't want it to appear as that you're just jumping on a trend or jumping on the bandwagon of being inclusive without actually giving an explanation of how you value diversity or why you think it's important. And this ties back into our strategy last week, where we looked at sort of those motives, right? The rationale model for engaging in diversity management. And this messaging is particularly important for women and racial minorities who are paying attention to these messages, again, found through survey research. So helpful here to look, to include a review of your messaging and make sure that you're really saying why you value diversity and what you intend to do with that diversity, rather than just looking like you're trying to increase your numbers. It's also important for women and racial minorities who have traditionally had reduced access to networks. So for these individuals, they aren't always able to just move up through the organization like other groups have been able to. And so they are looking to certain groups and organizations to signal to them that they might be able to move up if they haven't been able to do so in their current place. Other discussion of policies you might be doing, including discussion of affirmative action, specific diversity management strategies, your diversity philosophies. If you give diversity awards, any of that information is really important to include on your website or include in your promotional materials or discussions that you might be having with applicants. And it's important to share this information with all individuals, because you don't know who is going to be looking for a diversity focused organization. We don't want to only give this message to women and think women are the only ones who care about it. We want to give this information to all individuals and let them know, here are our values, here's our stand that we're taking, and here's what we're doing to further that mission. We also want to use representative images. So here with the representative images, we want to show what a diverse workforce looks like. So who's being represented on our company materials and our company website, things like that. But most importantly, we want these images to be authentic. So, if you have one female executive, we don't want that person on everything. That's when we start to make that individual into a token individual, where it's like, here's our one female executive, and we're trying to push that forward in sort of an inauthentic way. So we want to use images that are representative of a broad workforce, right? But we want those to be real and authentic images of our employees, and to demonstrate that we do care about diversity and to really showcase what it looks like within our organization. We also want to identify the type of applicants that we're looking for, and we want to be talking about the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required. We want to identify, the work experience we hope individuals have. We want to identify exactly who we're looking for at this stage when we're creating our recruitment messaging. So which exact groups are we hoping to increase in the applicant pool? What knowledge and skills do we want them to have? How much experience, etc. All of this information is important because it's going to help shape our messaging and where we push that messaging out to. Okay, so then we get to job candidates, and this is the subset of that applicant pool that meets the job qualifications. So once somebody applies, we have to then maintain interest. So how do we get someone to apply and want to stay in the pool? How do we get them to want to stay, get a job offer and stay with our organization? So to do that, we need to use fair selection practices. So there are certain practices that are going to be deemed as more fair to applicants than others, and we need to be mindful of what those are. So generally speaking, there are two broad approaches that organizations use to select employees. The first are interviews, and the second is testing. So these could be all kinds of job tests: a job knowledge test, a personality test, it could be a cognitive ability test. But know that some of these procedures are going to be deemed more fair, perceived as more fair by employees than others. So generally speaking, job applicants don't like taking cognitive ability tests, and they don't like taking personality tests. They tend to deem these as less fair for the job process. On the other hand, individuals who are applying for jobs tend to like interviews, and they tend to prefer job sample tests, where they can actually give you a sample of the work they might do and then get evaluated on that. Interesting about this is that cognitive ability tests are one of the best predictors of job performance. So even though applicants don't like them, they are actually pretty predictive in trying to identify who will succeed in the job. And on the other hand, interviews are actually much less predictive of future job performance, because usually we're not very good at reading people on the spot, or they're putting forth their best self right for the interview day. So the interview method that individuals tend to like is not as valid, and the method they don't like, cognitive ability tests, actually are more valid. So there's sort of a conundrum here we're going to talk about on the next slide as well. So it's really important that organizations openly discuss their selection procedures and purpose. So however you've chosen to design your selection process, again, this would be based on some of the strategies you've learned in your staffing and selection class. You need to openly discuss them and explain them to applicants so that they know why you're doing what you're doing, why you're asking them to do these things. And you should maintain communication with applicants throughout the selection process. So there's nothing worse than applying for a job and never hearing anything at all. When I was in graduate school, I applied for a job, and literally a year later, I got an email saying I didn't get it. I thought, well, yeah, I figured that out by now. It's been a year and you haven't communicated with me at all. So I assumed I didn't get the job. But just because you don't hire someone this time around doesn't mean you won't hire them again, or, consider looking at them in the future. So it's really important to maintain communication throughout the process, and letting people know if they didn't get it is okay. I think individuals would rather be informed than to be left in limbo. So connected to this idea of selection and selection procedures is a phenomenon in the management space that we call the diversity validity dilemma. So the diversity validity dilemma is this: our best predictors of job performance demonstrate the greatest degree of adverse impact. Okay, so let that sink in. The best predictor we have of job performance also demonstrates the greatest degree of adverse impact, meaning that it leads to differential selection of applicants. More specifically, cognitive ability tests are the best predictor, most valid predictor of future performance. And this has been shown time and again through lots of studies, that if we want to know how someone will perform, using a cognitive ability test has a great amount of predictive validity of their future performance. However, there are also these tests tend to disproportionately favor white individuals compared to individuals of color. So individuals of color have historically performed more poorly on cognitive ability tests, and there are a variety of reasons of why this could be. It could be based on access to prep materials. It can be based on language differences. It can be based on stereotype threat, which is a phenomenon in which certain individuals feel performance anxiety or feel threatened in certain instances where they have to demonstrate competence because they're afraid of being stereotyped or experiencing bias. So there's a lot of reasons why individuals, non-white individuals, might perform poorly on these tests. But it doesn't mean that they have low levels of cognitive ability. It doesn't mean that these individuals aren't cognitively able to do the job. There are just external and societal factors that are impacting their performance. But if we only use these tests and they tend to screen out minority employees or minority applicants, then we end up with a applicant pool that's kind of applicant candidate pool that is majority white individuals. So what we need to do is consider the full range of job performance. What will someone be doing for this job? What does it look like? What are all of the activities they need to engage in? And we need to think about performance across the spectrum. So again, in your other classes, hopefully you've learned about different types of job performance. If you're taking performance management with me in the fall, we're definitely going to dive into this information. But the idea is that job performance can take task performance, like the jobs we actually do. It can show up in citizenship, so ways in which we give back to the organization through things that aren't on the job description but count for the organization. And then counterproductive work behavior, things we might do that harm the organization. So we need to assess this full range and trying to predict this full range of job performance, not just whether someone can do the job. We might also use alternate methods or multiple methods. So perhaps instead of using a cognitive ability test on its own, we could pair it with a personality test, an integrity test. We could use interviews. We could use situational judgment tests. So trying to pair this one test that we have that can lead to adverse impact with other tests that might have less predictive validity but have lower levels of adverse impact, and using these combinations to help us select the best applicants. And perhaps the best advice that I can really give to you all is to avoid searching for a unicorn. So there tends to be this belief that we need to find the one right individual, that we need to find the one person who's going to be perfect for this job. And just rarely does that person exist. And so some of this is changing our mindset or our own expectations. So again, let's evaluate the job requirements. Is everything we're listing actually necessary to do the job? So let's look at those knowledge, skills, and abilities, those KSAs. What's desired versus what's actually needed? So let's start with what's needed and get someone who can do the job. And then maybe over time we can push them towards those desired KSAs. So are there aspects of the individual skills or abilities that can be developed? Do they need to have it on day one, or can they have it, by month 6 or year 1? What are some things that we can train them on versus expecting them to come in with those skills? And then again, evaluating our job selection methods. So are the methods we're using, do they predict performance? If they're not really predicting performance in our firm, then we shouldn't be using them. What's the value of using a personality test, so to speak, if it doesn't actually predict performance? Does that job selection method have adverse impact? Are we seeing it screening out a significant portion of the population that we want to retain in the applicant pool? If yes, what other methods could we use to help retain a diverse applicant pool, but also help us get to predicting job performance? And then, of course, the last subsection, these hires, these individuals who we're going to give a job offer to. And at this stage, everything so far has really been in the hands of the organization, but here we see a shift of responsibilities to the applicant. So information that these individuals have received throughout the process is going to influence their decision. So the way we communicate, the way we've treated individuals, the way we've made them feel, all of that is going to influence their decision. As well as their experiences. So did they come out for an interview? How did that interview go? What was the work experience like? How kindly were they treated? What messaging did they see, right? This combination of information and experience during recruitment makes a big difference on whether or not individuals are going to want to stay with our organization. Or I guess accept an offer with our organization. So we have to be mindful that most of the power is with the organization at the front end, and we have all the power of we're the ones making the offer, but at the end of the day, you want someone to accept that offer. So when you find a good candidate, you want them to say, yes, we want to be part of your organization, and the way to do that is to be mindful of what we're saying, how it's being shared, how we're treating a person throughout the experience. So that gets us to the end of the week. I'm going to go ahead and post the rest of your materials for the week. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hope you all are doing well, being well, and have a productive week ahead of you. Take care.